Hello, you're watching AddleshawGoddard's Employment Channel on the 1st of March 2012. As you will have seen from the recent press coverage of the clawback of bonuses from senior executives at Lloyds Bank, the issue of reward for failure continues to grab the headlines. Although the outcry over rewards for failure was initially confined to the financial services sector, it has in fact widened to encompass all listed companies. And so we're finding that shareholders are increasingly expecting to see clawback provisions in service contracts to prevent executives receiving rewards that are undeserved. Today's Employment Channel news programme focuses on the key legal and commercial issues involved with clawback provisions in remuneration arrangements. And we are joined today by Michael Carter, a partner in our employee incentives team here at Addleshaw-Goddard, who discusses these issues in more detail.
In the last 2 weeks we've seen the announcement of Lloyds Bank clawing back bonuses in relation to the mis-selling of the payment protection insurance, and also UBS clawing back share bonuses on the back of the trading scandal that led to a 1.2 billion Swiss franc loss in 2011. So given the topical nature of clawback and the continuing debate around reward for failure, I thought it'd be useful to look at clawback in more detail. Before we do so, I think it's important to just understand the terminology around clawback. And actually there's two important words that are important: clawback and malice. In clawback, what we're talking about is clawing back cash or shares that have already vested and been awarded to the individual. Often tax has also been paid on them. For malice, what we're talking about is reducing the level of award which will vest. And in fact, what most cases we see and talk about are actually malice rather than clawback. In the financial sector, malice and clawback provisions have become very common since about 2009. This is on the back of the financial crisis and the Financial Services Authority in the UK and similar authorities in Europe and the United States looking at remuneration and restricting and imposing conditions on them. So what we've seen is that there has been malice clauses put into contracts and been forced to put in them by the FSA's remuneration code in the UK. And so this reduces any deferred remuneration that can be paid to participants if either something happens in the future regarding their own performance or the performance of the part of the business that they work in or the whole of the business. And because, in addition, greater amounts of remuneration have been deferred, up to 60% in the case of the UK, then these malice clauses have become more common, but also become more of an issue, as we've seen with Lloyds and UBS, as I've mentioned already. Outside of the financial sector, malice and clawback provisions are still relatively rare. However, given the announcements on executive pay from Vince Cable, the Minister of Business Innovation and Skills, one of the key areas he was looking to focus on is clawback, and we're going to see consultation around those clawback and malice provisions over the next few months. It'll be interesting to see what impact they do have on the wider listed community in the UK. So in relation to malice, we can see that they're relatively easy to implement and look a very sensible thing to adopt for most companies. What I now want to do is look at some of the technical issues around clawback. Firstly, in order to be able to operate clawback provisions, there needs to be a contractual right for the company to do so. This also applies to malice. It's going to be very difficult to operate clawback and malice provisions if you don't have an express contractual right in the agreement. Second area in relation to clawback is, can you actually recover from HM Revenue and Customs the tax and national insurance you've paid on any payments you've paid out and are now wanting to recover back from the employee? In short, the answer is probably no. In a recent meeting with HMRC, they made it clear that in most circumstances, they're not going to allow you to recover the tax and national insurance in connection with clawback. There will be certain situations where this might happen, and in fact I've seen it with some of my clients going to their local tax inspector. So it is worth seeing if you can in certain circumstances. The third area I want to look at in relation to clawback is around the clawback of share awards. And the question here is, what actually are you seeking to claw back? Because the amounts will differ depending on the individual having retained the shares or sold the shares and obtained cash consideration. Finally, we're going to look at whether courts will actually uphold our clawback provision. And there's 2 points here. The first is whether the provision is an unlawful penalty. And this will depend on whether courts consider the clawback provision to be an agreed sum of liquidated damages based on what the parties consider are the losses arising out of the breach. In that case, it won't be an unlawful penalty. Or whether the clawback provision is the primary purpose of it appears to be deterring the breach rather than compensating the employee for its loss. And that will turn on the facts. The second potential issue is around the clawback provision being an unlawful restraint of trade. This is going to be more unusual, but it will be where the clawback provision is triggered by the breach of a restrictive covenant by the employee rather than by a restatement of financial performance. This is going to be rarer in the UK, but is quite common in relation to US contracts, so it is something to look out for. Even if you have a clawback provision in your contract, are you going to operate it? I think the answer is only in extremis. It is quite difficult to try and recover monies that have already been paid to employees, and typically here we're talking ex-employees, and so it's likely to be where the company or the remuneration committee considers that the mischief is material. The remuneration committee will need to be sure of its ground, and unless the evidence is overwhelming, then I think it's going to be a very brave company to operate clawback provisions. So where does this leave us? We've discussed malice, very common now in the financial sector. They are being used, Lloyds and UBS being two good examples, and I think we'll start to see more of them coming into the wider UK PLC. In relation to clawback, I think there's a lot of technical issues that in reality mean that clawback is not going to happen that often. So it's going to be interesting to see the consultation and the detail coming out on clawback and malice from BIS over the next few months.
Thanks, Michael. Our employee incentives team have prepared an e-alert setting out the key legal and commercial issues in more detail, and you can access this by clicking on the link below the screen. If you have any queries on this at all, please feel free to contact your usual AddleshawGoddard contact, Michael Carter directly, or via the Contact Us box to the right of the screen. So that's all for today from AddleshawGoddard's Employment Channel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.